Hi guys! Welcome back to my channel where I make videos about tech, unboxing, product reviews, and some fun stuff. And for today's video, I will be doing a tutorial on Vlsm or variable length subnet mask. And this video tutorial was highly requested by some of the people who watched our video about subnetting Class A IP addresses, especially those who are going to take their CCENT and CCNA exam very soon. So if you're interested in knowing and learning about Vlsm, please keep on watching, and without further ado, let's get started with the video. So before we get started with subnetting, let's define what Vlsm is first. And Vlsm stands for variable length subnet mask, and that is a subnet design that uses more than one subnet mask in the same network, and also the design that allows a subnet mask to have variable sizes, hence the name variable length. Length, or the size of the subnetwork, is varied. Okay, and the next question would be, why do we use Vlsm, and what is the difference between Vlsm and just the regular subnetting that we learned earlier? Actually, Vlsm is a much more practical way to apply subnetting to the real world or real life scenario. Okay, to explain it better and for you to understand it better, I have here on the board an example of a network that we just did a regular subnetting to. So in this network address, as you can see, they all have the same host. So we just did a regular subnetting for a Class C IP address here, and all of them has something in common, and that they all have a 62 usable host for this network, which means all the network here has an equal size of subnet. So the subnetting here in our network is correct, and we did everything properly, but what could be wrong in this scenario? As I have said earlier, they all have the same number of usable hosts, and that could be a problem to implement in real world or real life scenario, because there's a lot of times, or in most cases, that subnets have different sizes or different length. For example, a subnet for the engineering department may be of a different size than a subnet for the HR department, because usually the engineering department is bigger than the HR department. So you would have a different number of hosts for one subnet and with a different subnet. And also, if you are considering your WAN links as well, it only uses 2 usable hosts. So if we are going to use this kind of regular subnetting in your network in the real life, what would happen is that they would all have the same number of hosts. Okay, so to further elaborate the example, for example, in your subnetwork, the engineering department needs 60 hosts, while the HR needs only 15 hosts, and your WAN links only needs 2 usable hosts. If we use this kind of network and subnetting that accommodates all 62 usable hosts, what would happen is it would really accommodate the number of hosts needed for the engineering department, but for HR, it would accommodate the 15 hosts that they need, but there's going to be a lot of unusable IP address that would be wasted on that network. If we give the HR this, for example, and they only need 15, there's gonna be a lot of IP address that's gonna be wasted and not utilized and used. And for the WAN links, especially, that only needs 2 usable hosts, if we give them this 2 networks, there will be like 58 extra usable hosts for that network that is not going to be utilized as well. So that's going to be a waste of IP addresses in your network that could be placed somewhere else that's more useful. Okay, so now that we know what Vlsm is and what it is used for, let's now move on to the actual action, and that is subnetting a network using Vlsm. So before we get started with Vlsm subnetting, I have already assumed that you already know and understand the regular subnetting of Class A, B, C IP addresses, because I am not going to explain how all of that works. I'm just going to explain how Vlsm works in this video. So if you are still not solid on that concept, you can watch our video on subnetting, or you can also watch other videos and read on other resources as well until you you really solidify your understanding in subnetting before watching this video. So let's get started with subnetting now. So on this board, I have prepared an example and a diagram of the network that we are going to subnet using Vlsm. And the network address is 192.168.1.0/24 subnet mask, and this is what the network looks like. Let us count how many networks we have in here. So we have for the LAN 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we have WAN links as well. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's 8 networks in total. And as you can see, I have put the number of hosts that the network requires on each subnet, and as you notice here, they all have different sizes of network, and that's where Vlsm comes in the picture. So we are going to subnet this using Vlsm with a more practical method than with the regular subnetting. Okay, so before we start with the actual subnetting, there is one thing that we always prepare and need before we get started. And as you have understood subnetting, you know that we always need this binary chart right here. This will be our magic tool, and all you have to know is this chart in order to do subnetting for Class A, Class B, Class C, Vlsm networks. So if you know this chart and understand the concept of this, you are golden. Okay, so now that we have the binary chart here ready, we can now get started with the actual subnetting using Vlsm. So since I have mentioned earlier that we only have 3 simple and easy steps in Vlsm subnetting. First step is to start subnetting with the most number of hosts in the given network. So now going back to the diagram we have in here, and I hope that you can see this. So the first step is to start with the most number of hosts. We are just gonna look for the network that has the most number of hosts in here, and looking for it, it's gonna be this 29 hosts. So that's where we will start subnetting. Okay, so now that we have identified that 29 hosts is the most number of host in that given network, now let's go back to our binary chart and move on to the next step, which is to select the nearest block size that could accommodate 29 hosts in that network. Okay, so now we have the binary chart here. Let us now see what block size would fit or accommodate 29 hosts appropriately. Let's start from the lowest number. So let's just see what fits 29 hosts in here. 16 would be too small and not enough size, and the next would be 32. So 32 is gonna be the block size that we will select for the first network that we are gonna subnet with 29 hosts. So let us remember and keep in mind 32 block size. Okay, so now that we know what the increment is, and for the first network with 29 hosts, that is gonna be 32 block size. Let's get started with subnetting now. So we are going to start with the given network address, and that is 192.168.1.0. Since we know that the increment is 32, we are just going to put that as our next network address. And now you know the rest and how to complete this network address. The broadcast address for this network would be the number before 32, and that is .31. And for the usable host, that's just gonna be the number after the network address and the number before the broadcast address, which is gonna be .1 until .30. So there we have it. We have subnetted the first network with 29 number of hosts, and for this network we have this block size 32, which means it can accommodate for 30 usable hosts. Okay, so that is subnetting the first network that could accommodate 29 number of hosts. And since we only have 3 steps, as I've mentioned earlier, we are just gonna repeat the steps over and over again until we complete the process and have subnetted the given networks and accommodate all the hosts needed. Okay, so going back to step number 1, let's now identify the next most number of hosts in the network. And looking into the diagram, the next most number of hosts is this one with 25 hosts. So that's what we are gonna subnet next. So let's get started with the 25 hosts. Let's go back to our binary chart and identify what block size can accommodate the 25 hosts, and it's gonna be still 32 for now. So 32 is gonna be our next increment for the next network. So let me just put an increment of 32 for the next network, and that's gonna be .64. So the next network address would be 192.168.1.32, and let's now figure out what the broadcast address will be, and that will be the number before 64. That's gonna be .63. And the usable hosts are the numbers between the network and the broadcast address, which is gonna be .33 to .62. So there we have it. We have another network that can accommodate 25 hosts, because this has a block size of 32, which means that it has 30 usable hosts. Okay, now let's go back to our diagram and identify the next network with the most number of hosts. And that is gonna be the network with 13 hosts. So let us go and subnet that next. So we have to select the nearest block size that could accommodate 13 number of hosts, and going back to our binary chart, let's see what could accommodate 13 number of hosts. Okay, 8 is too small. 16 is just right to accommodate 13 hosts. So we are going to use 16 as our next increment. So now the increment that we are going to use for the next network is 16. So we are going to add 16 to the next network. So 64 plus the increment 16 is going to be 80. And this third network is going to be our next network that can accommodate 13 hosts. So the network address would be 192.168.1.64, and the broadcast address would be the number before 80, and that's going to be .79. And the usable hosts are going to be .65 to .78, which are the numbers between the network address and the broadcast address. And as you can see in here, the increment for this third network is different from the first two, and that is how Vlsm works. It has different subnet masks, so it can use different increments because it all depends on the number of hosts that you are going to use for the network, and that has different sizes or varying lengths. Okay, so we have like 5 more networks that are left to subnet. So let's move on now to the next network with the most number of hosts. And after 29, 25, 13, the next would be this one with 8 hosts. So let's see and subnet the next network now. Okay, so let's now move on to the next network that needs to accommodate 8 number of hosts. So going back to our binary chart here, let's see, we actually have the number 8 in here. So are we gonna use 8 as our increment for the next network? If you answered no, then you are correct. So going back to what we learned from the previous subnetting examples and lectures, let's go back to how we determine the number of usable hosts in a network. And that is, the host is equal to the increment or the block size, which is 8 for example in here, and it's always minus 2 because 2 addresses are reserved for the network and the broadcast address. So after we deducted 2 from the block size, that will be the number of the usable hosts that we can use in the network. And in this case, we can't use the block size or the increment 8 because it can accommodate the 8 number of hosts needed in the network, because 8 minus 2 is equivalent to 6, and it is only left with 6 usable hosts to use, which is not enough for our next network. So we have to move on to the next block size that can accommodate this, and that is gonna be 16 in here. 16 is just right. It can accommodate 8 or more hosts. So let us subnet using 16 increment this time for the next network. Alright, so we have the increment 16, and let's just now add it to the next network. So .80 plus increment 16 is equivalent to .96, and let's now fill in what our network address for this network is, and that's going to be 192.168.1.80, and the broadcast address is the number before 96, and that is 95. Broadcast address is 95, and the usable hosts for this network are .81 until .94, and that is 14 usable subnet for this network, more than enough for the 8 hosts required. Okay, so let us check our diagram again, and we only have the 1 links network here left to be subnetted. And since they all have 2 number of hosts, let's just subnet this all together. And usually in the 1 links, there's only 2 hosts, because there's only 2 points that needs to have an address in here. So that's why we only have 2 hosts. Okay, so we are almost done subnetting our example network. Yay! And before we proceed to the 1 links, let's go back to our binary chart first, and let's see what the nearest block size is that could accommodate 2 hosts. Okay, so let's start with the smallest one. So we have 2 in here, but can the 2 block size accommodate the 2 hosts? As we discussed earlier, it can't, because the number of hosts is equal to the block size minus 2, because we have reserved addresses for network and the broadcast address. So we can't use the block size 2 here. Let's move on to the next one, and let's see if we can use 4. So 4 is enough to use to subnet the 1 links. Okay, so we are just gonna add 4 here in the next networks, the next 4 networks that we are gonna do. So 96 plus the increment 4 is gonna be 100, and I'm just gonna go on to the next 4 networks because they all have the same number of hosts. Then next, after that, we are just gonna add the increment again. 100 plus the increment 4 is gonna be 104. Then next is gonna be 108, and next is gonna be 112. Network octet here is 192.168.1, and I am just gonna fill in for the next because they're all the same. Okay, let's now finish the last 4 networks that we have. So for this 96 network address, the broadcast address is gonna be .99. Usable address, we only have 2 usable address. It's gonna be 97 and 98. Then for the next network, for the 100 network, the broadcast address is gonna be .103. The usable addresses will be 101 and 102. The same goes to the 3rd network that we have. Broadcast address will be .107. Usable IP address would be .105 and 106. So that's it. That is how we subnet using Vlsm if we have networks that has different sizes or subnet mask. Once you have learned how to subnet Class A, B, and C. This is just gonna be a piece of cake because it's the same process that we use. The only difference is we are gonna have to use a different block size or increment on every network depending on the number of hosts that is needed. I really do hope that you have learned something from this video. I know taking an exam is a lot of pressure and hard work. Good luck to all of those people who are gonna take their CSENT or CCNA exam soon, and I hope this video helps. If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to leave comments in the comment section below, and if you have any more other requests for video tutorials or other videos, please feel free to leave a comment as well. And thank you so much for watching this video.